Mhm.
Hey guys, this is Courtney from Willow's Bloom, and I am here with a friend here. She actually lives in Denver, so I'm super excited to get to talk to her today about the Pluto in Aquarius. This is Taryn, and she's going to introduce herself and kind of what she's all about. But she's such an amazing astrologer, and I'm super excited to have you guys get her perspective on this.
Awesome. Thank you, Courtney. I'm so happy to be here with you. My name is Taryn Bond, or Taryn Leigh Bond is how I go by on different platforms. I'm primarily on TikTok, but I'm also on Instagram a bit and YouTube. You can find me under the handle TarynLeighBond. That's how you spell it. But I am an evolutionary intuitive astrologer who kind of practices astrology from a more soul-based perspective, a little bit psychological, but really coming back to the soul's journey and definitely referencing the kind of across lifetimes journey that the soul might be on and the deeper meaning behind the things that we see in our chart and also what comes up when we experience transit. So I really like to look at the very, you could say, zoomed out soulful perspective. So I'm really excited to talk to you because I feel like we have really good complementary styles of reading.
Yeah, it's funny because my tagline is astrology for the soul. So I definitely feel like to have that bigger perspective is just so important. And hopefully we can give that to you guys today with this Pluto and Aquarius. Yeah, we'll get into the details, but this is such a long cycle that I think it will be beneficial to get that zoomed out perspective that we can give as well.
Yeah, totally.
All right, so let's get started by looking at the chart when it first moves into Aquarius. You can see that, right?
Yes, I can.
Okay, cool. So Pluto's been in Capricorn for quite a long time, right? Since what? Since 2008, and that's like when the market crashed. So
Yeah.
very
Long.
exciting, guys.
Yeah, that was a fun one.
So I'm sure we can imagine that given that it has a 20-year cycle in a sign, typically, I mean, it's going to depend on what sign it's in, but we're going to get a very noticeable type of shift in energy. And I don't know, Taryn, what do you think? Because yes, I do think the market crash was related to Pluto, but do you think that there's going to be like a big event that will herald in the time of Pluto shifting into Aquarius? Or do you think it's more a lot of little shifts in our society?
Yeah, well, I think that this one may be less of a heavy event because I feel like with Pluto and Capricorn, we got all of those heavy events when it entered, but also just everything that happened, the Great Conjunction, 2020, and everything that involved Pluto's relationship with other outer planets. I
Mhm.
feel as though that was more of the tangible, right? Capricorn, Saturn, physical manifestation of Pluto's stuff in the world. And I think this Pluto and Aquarius is much more a conceptual shift of like the collective
Mhm.
perspectives. And this one's interesting because it may be things that we look back on and be like, wow, the world did change then, but it may not feel that way when it first happens.
Mhm.
Because it is entering a sign that has two rulers, right? We get some Saturn energy, but the Uranian energy of Aquarius too leads me to feel like that this might be something where it's an unexpected change that we may not even understand or be aware happened until we're looking back on it. Especially because Pluto won't be forming any major tight aspects to any of the outer planets. So I don't know if it's going to be like a big one-off event
Mhm.
as much as some of the Capricorn energy.
Yeah. And I'm just so excited today to talk about technology and AI because I just geek out on that stuff.
Yes.
And we're talking about Uranus being one of the modern ruler of Aquarius. And of course, Uranus has all to do with technology and AI and things of that nature. And it's like, think back, 20 years ago, could we really have predicted the level of technology that we have today? And, how small a phone is and yet how powerful it is. And I think that is the nature of this Aquarius energy, where we're going to start to see societal massive transformations happen so exponentially, things that we never expected, like you said, especially because of technology and the way that we can't, unless you're in the industry, we can't really picture right now what life is going to be like with all those new types of things. Like, you know, you're on TikTok, you're doing super well on TikTok, and TikTok didn't even exist 10 years ago. And now that's like a
Yeah,
career, right? So it's crazy how things can change with that.
yeah. No, I'm glad you mentioned that. It's really wild to think about the pace of change here with the technology, and Uranus also relating to like quantum physics and kind of the instant manifestation, how things are interconnected, but also like it's electricity, it's
Mhm.
lightning, it's so fast. And
Mhm.
now we've got Pluto, who's going to be supercharged by this like electric Uranian energy. And it's like, who knows? I always say with Uranus, the planet, to try to really predict something that's Uranian in nature is like to misunderstand
Yeah.
Uranus as a planet, because
Mhm.
you can't predict it. And so that's kind of the excitement quality of this too. But I also can understand how it can seem a little scary to
Yeah.
people as well, because it's like, oh yeah, we have no idea what's going to happen. We just have kind of some predictions, but things are going to change quickly, basically.
Yeah.
So
Especially because we're moving from this large cycle where Pluto was in an earth sign to now being in an air sign. And if you know Earth and you think about Capricorn, this is like the foundation and the structure of our society, right? So this is all that stuff happening with COVID and people needing to go to actually be in their homes and not go into work. And the way that society was structured was completely altered in some facets. And our daily physical life looked different. And it moves slowly, but it also was very impactful. And I feel like once it moves into an air sign, definitely, I feel like Uranus has an erratic quality. And I don't necessarily feel like it will move in that same kind of slow but steady progression, like I feel like COVID did or Pluto being Capricorn did. I mean,
mhm.
you can even see that with the housing crisis in 2008. Like you could see that building, like the bubble was going to
Yeah.
burst type of thing. It wasn't out of nowhere, you know, it was like, okay, this is why it happened. And so I kind of feel like as Pluto shifts into an air sign, you know, it's like Uranus is linked with lightning. You think about lightning, it's like, it's this crazy patterns of electricity and light. And it's like, of course, it's unpredictable, but also it's very erratic. It can shift from one thing to another thing. So I don't feel like we're going to have the same style of change or pace of change. Um, and so it could feel really disorienting, especially if you have quite a bit of fixed signs in your chart. You might feel like, oh my gosh, you know, I wasn't ready for this. You know, there's no preparation, I feel like, fully for this kind of transit.
Yeah. No, absolutely. It's very, Uranus is so non-linear, and
Mhm.
Pluto really has been in the sign that has to do with slow and steady runs the race, like working hard over time, things building
Mhm.
and climbing the mountain. The things that even when they fell apart and that was shocking, it still was something that, as you mentioned, was predictable. Whereas with Aquarius, with Uranus, by nature, it's like, no, it's lightning strikes out of the blue sometimes. And
Mhm.
it's completely just erratic. And
Mhm.
it's really interesting too, because Pluto as a planet, which we really look at a lot in evolutionary astrology, but Pluto in a sign isn't necessarily, I think it's easy to think of it like, okay, we're going to have a lot of Aquarian energy right now. But Pluto, by design, kind of goes through a sign to destroy manifestations of that sign.
Mhm.
So it can look kind of like this is the whole picture of it. There's positives that come out of it, but really Pluto's aim is to destroy anything that stands in the way of getting to where we need to go as a collective. It's really about burning off everything that's not truth, you could say, that's not in alignment with kind of the goal, the vision. And that's messy. Most of the
Mhm.
time, it's messy
Mhm.
processes that Pluto kind of puts us through. And so with Capricorn, it's like we saw structures of life kind of crumble that we thought, for example, like getting up and going to work every single day, school. With COVID, we saw that ended. There was lockdown, and that was something that nobody had ever really conceptualized, or really, most people had never considered the possibility of a global lockdown. And
Mhm.
even things like that, things that were so set in stone, Capricorn, that we thought they were immovable, they would never be changed. Pluto came in and was like, watch this, it's
Yeah.
done. And
Mhm.
then it never like, yes, things have it's been a slow progression, Capricorn back, but the world does not look now like it did in
Mhm.
2019.
Yeah.
And it won't again. The shift, so many people now working from home who probably won't go back to the office. So
Mhm.
many companies that are like, you know what, we're not going back to the office, stay home. And so the Capricorn structures that we thought were a foundational part of almost human existence prove themselves to be also mutable. And that's really the Pluto kind of burning everything down so the phoenix can rise energy. And transferring that into Aquarius, I think, is going to be quite fascinating because, yeah, I think a lot of technological relationships and things of that sort will be coming up with this.
Yeah. And I think it's important to also recognize that Pluto, it will bring the truth. And that usually means it's going to bring up all the garbage. It's going to bring up all the dirt, the secrets, the lies, the darkness. And if you know the mythology behind Pluto or like Hades, I believe, I don't know it super well, but I believe there was this woman named Persephone, this other goddess, who he dragged down into Hades. She was like this innocent, like young woman that he liked, and he like dragged her down into hell, and she eventually made her way back. But I think she lived like part-time in hell, part-time back in heaven. But that experience of being dragged down completely changed her as a person, as she saw all of that was hidden away from her in her more innocent version of life. And so we can really see that with Capricorn, where our institutions, our structures, powers, businesses, hierarchies, all of those things really had some darkness shown about where things were corrupted, where there was these horrible inequalities and things of that nature. And I think we'll continue to see that as Pluto moves into Aquarius, especially since Aquarius is very much a sign of the people. And I think we'll start to see as well where there are maybe corruption within the collective and these sort of collectivist mindsets. And we had a long conversation about this before we actually like sat down to do this call. Because I feel like it's interesting how what happens with Pluto being Capricorn kind of births the thing that will be altered with Pluto and Aquarius. So it's like we're coming out of this intense, like, hierarchy where men are on top and there's like a right way to do things and a wrong way to do things. And there's tradition. And now it's like, well, you can choose your gender, you can choose your age, you can choose your name. Like there's no, like, what is an identity? There's no like specific, it's like it's a pushback to the traditions and the boxes that we're all put in, right? There's no like specific way that we have to do things anymore, especially for like the younger generation. But now that Pluto's going to Aquarius, that maybe some of that maybe to an extreme, not all of it. Some of it's great and some of it will be extreme because that's human nature. And Pluto will come in here and it will start to show how these extremes are actually darkness, and it will emphasize the extremes. It will bring them to the surface in a way that is somewhat destructive also for interpersonal relationships, because Aquarius is very much about like our collective union. But what happens when there are these different collectives with different opinions? Like we can start to actually have a little bit more discord amongst types of people, if that makes sense. And I think identities and like searching for our identity is a big part amongst the crowd with Pluto and Aquarius.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Especially considering the Pluto having just passed through Capricorn, which is really about its hierarchy. It's the authority figure, which you could say dictates everything, but also identity. The authority tells you who you are in the construct of life. Pluto in Aquarius has more of a free-for-all energy of like you decide who you are, but there's still hidden Pluto, social pressure, Aquarius that is shaping identities, even if people don't realize that they're being shaped by it, which is fascinating because Capricorn, Saturn, Capricorn physical manifestation, it's more obvious. And it's so interesting because, like, me personally, before Pluto entered Capricorn, I didn't often hear about like conspiracy theories or things about governments. But then Pluto and Capricorn was like, oh my gosh. And everyone's like, there's all these secrets, there's these things that are hidden. And now the shift is like, okay, yeah, the structures that be have corruption, many of them. But where's the corruption within how we relate as a society? In what ways are we almost like subliminally controlling each other
Mhm.
by checking each other or by maybe shunning certain things, even if it's in a very passive, more subdued way? And so it's very interesting because now it's like, it's not like, oh, how is the government that controls us being corrupt? It's like, how are we being corrupt? How
Yeah.
are we responding to that? And also, how are we then policing each other? We don't even, Pluto and Aquarius following the Capricorn transit really feels like, oh, we don't even need like someone policing us because this looks like people kind of doing it to each other, which I think is something that's been growing for a while now. And finding like the fine line between, at what point do you say, this is really messed up, I'm going to say something, and then at what point do you recognize there's really with Aquarius, there can be this strong projection of like, all the issues are out there. Let me tell everyone how they need to act different so that the world is okay. And I think that that can be a common instinct under this energy, even though really Pluto is just trying to hold the mirror up. Pluto's like, look at yourself, look at yourself.
Mhm.
But a lot of times that experience of taking a hard look in the mirror is so uncomfortable that it's almost easier to slip into, well, let me fix the world. Let me tell everyone what they're doing wrong because I know how the world could be better, right? That's the intellectualism of Aquarius. I know how the world could be better, so let me tell them about it instead of how do I actually sit and make myself better? So it's
Mm.
very interesting because it really is like this the shadows of people coming to the surface.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's so important, the reflection piece, because whenever we look at one sign, the opposite sign will hold some piece of the medicine. So the Leo of, how do I focus on what my authenticity is? How do I go within and see what I need to be working on with myself? How do I know what my purpose is? Like all those things, I think will help keep us more balanced when Pluto comes in, because Pluto will always try to show extremes because people are so, including myself, it's like we're so just dumb sometimes. Like we need the extreme in our face, irritating emotional experience to be like, oh, maybe I should change this. It's like we tolerate subpar things or push things aside for so long. And I think in many ways, Pluto coming into Aquarius, um, even though it's a sign that is very much about the collective and us all feeling like we belong, I think the extremes of belonging versus not belonging are going to become very obvious. And I think the policing of people is part of what creates that extreme. So I personally believe that there will be different groups that pop up with different belief systems that will within themselves will police each other, and then they'll kind of like be at war with other groups that think very differently. And so it's like the idea of, you know, where is my tribe? I feel that that question can become one of the biggest questions of this time. Like, where do I belong? And then in order to understand where you belong, you first have to understand like who you are. And I think sometimes with Pluto and Aquarius, we can get so wrapped up in that sense of belonging that we conform rather than actually individuate and act as individuals within a collective or within a group. And so I think, I mean, we talked about this, Taryn, during our call, even just looking at how different countries function, like a more individualistic society versus a more collective society, is going to become highlighted. And then that is more on the micro level within our personal lives. Like, how do we retain both? Like, what's the balance of both? You'll see people go into extremes to fit in a certain way. And then they kind of lose that sense of identity. They don't even know who they are because they're going to be defined by certain things that make them feel better. Like by having certain labels. And then other people might go to the extremes of, I'm going to be individualistic just to be individualistic, and it's not authentic. So I think the question around authenticity, belonging, identity, all those things are going to become so important on the personal and larger level within countries in the world as well.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. And I'm glad you mentioned kind of the paradox within Aquarius of it being the sign of individualism, but also the sign of groups and group mentality, and finding the place, finding the role within it. Because Pluto can really inspire anyone, including myself. Pluto just inspires the desire to take things to the extreme. And because it's now entering the sign of the radical, that's what we're looking at.
Yeah.
Radical thinking, radical perspectives. It's, Aquarius is an extremist sign. It's fixed earth or fixed air. It's going to go, and it's going to go all the way. It's the maverick. There's a fearlessness there, but there is also a coldness that, as the final air sign ruled by Saturn in particular, and then Uranus, it can logically rationalize kind of its decision making in terms of, losing its identity in a group, because it's like, well, I need the group more than I need my identity. But there's also the way that the other is treated, because Aquarius is also the sign of the exile. And so it's like, in what ways are we so terrified, Pluto, of becoming an exile ourselves within society that we actually play a part in casting stones, in exiling and judging air sign energy, judging others and pushing them to the fringe, So it's very, very interesting, because it seems like there's a lot of extremist beliefs and perspectives. And I love that you mentioned the polarity of Leo too, because one thing about Leo is that, every sign has its positives and its shadows, but also this Leo energy is the balance point, the polarity of this Pluto and Aquarius. Leo here is the heart. It's literally, it's compassion, it's warmth. And so when we think about Pluto being opposite Leo, it's like, okay, we're going to naturally have more of a tendency, everyone, to maybe slip into coldness and rationalizing things. But rationalizing things isn't the same as compassionately approaching people as if they're humans. It's very easy to slip into, oh, these are just numbers, or, humans are just ants on the earth. And that gets a little dark pretty quick, but that's Pluto and Aquarius, right? Pluto's here to bring the darkness to the light. And kind of to quote like my favorite astrologer I've always looked up to, and this was a perspective about the lunar nodes actually in Pluto, or in Aquarius and Leo. But Stephen Forrest described it as like trading rightness, being right, for effectiveness, Leo, for having the warmth and compassion to actually get up and lead. In Aquarius, we're looking at no man's land. There's no leaders. This is like what do they call the part of the ocean where there's no laws? Do you know? I can't think of it off the top of my head. It's that kind of energy. It's like, how much do we want to remove Leo, the king of everything, of anything? Because at what point does it become more dangerous for people to just have all this power? And that's not just publicly, it's more so socially. And at what point I think the book, it's interesting, but the book Lord of the Flies was really coming up, because it's like, what happens when it's just up to people to determine what they do, what comes next, and how there's just that natural tendency to split into groups and to split into, at some point, there's sides. And nobody's even sure why or how it became people pitted against each other. But at some point, pretty quickly, it's just from, oh my gosh, survival, life is kind of the enemy. Life is the thing we need to be focused on keeping in the face of the darkness of the world and nature and what it's trying to do to us, which is, it's hard to survive out there. But very quickly, it shifts into, no, we're too busy fighting each other. We're not preserving life anymore. We're actually killing each other. And it's the complete opposite. And it's kind of that switch. And so Pluto does have an inherent level of control. There's a desire for control, social control, Pluto and Aquarius. very interesting. And that brings up kind of a whole other point of like shifting from, I perceive it as shifting from these massive celebrity icons into influencers and people on the internet who now have social control, and what that means and what that will look like, and how, technically, not even technically, that's a lot less regulated if you think about the fact that anyone who's like on TV has a whole team that they have to run things by, and they have someone there who's helping them prepare for interviews. But when we're talking about just people from their homes who have platforms, what they say and do have impact, but it's not being checked, which is beautiful in many ways. There's a lot more Aquarius freedom there, but naturally there's shadows there too when anything increases, when anything is liberated that much in terms of literally who has the social influence, which I think is coming up. So yeah.
Yeah, I think the power of each individual voice as well as collective group voices become enhanced. And then also power struggles, which Pluto also represents within that, is going to become really obvious. And we talked about this even before we hopped on the call, which is, how much censorship we see. And, Aquarius is, its modern ruler is Uranus, which is the planet of astrology. So I'd be very curious to see if astrology is affected by this in some capacity, either positively or negatively. But I definitely think with Pluto moving into Aquarius, the topic of censorship and what is and isn't allowed to be said, specifically within like society, and online. So basically, like if you say the wrong thing in a friend group and that doesn't vibe with the morals of that friend group, like you getting canceled, or if you say the wrong thing online, your platform you get deplatformed. And there are these kind of extreme consequences or stories surrounding what is and isn't okay. And that, again, that policing of one another, which can become really obvious. And I think that very much links to what you're saying around Aquarius being a little bit more cold and detached, because for such a people-oriented sign, the Aquarians are the most common that I hear say, I love people, but I hate people. Like, I don't want anything to do with them. And I hear that all the time. It's like they care so much and they do so much for people, but yet they also feel extremely drained by them, and they can't fully empathize. And not that they can't empathize, but it's almost like they do better when they detach and they're going off into their world, because they just get drained by the way people are. And I also feel like that's going to come up, that kind of cold, detached, logical side. Yes, it's going to come up in all of us, but it's also going to come up in the fact that I do think AI is going to be a really predominant part of our culture moving forward, technology. And that is the essence of technology. It's detached, it's logical, it's rational, and it's doing what's best or following a certain set of rules that maybe society or groups of people have programmed into that AI or into that social media network or whatever, which is probably AI policing social media network is all going to be connected. It's like they're going to maybe have AI be the thing that, I mean, they already do, that pulls out certain data of what we say, and then it's AI policing us at the end of the day. It's people creating things that will police us. And this is just going to kind of continue on and on and on and grow exponentially. And it's a little bit scary to think about, what makes us human at that point, because Leo is ruled by the sun, and that is very much around, to me, like our life force essence. It's our, like, sort of like our soul in a way. And I think if we're not tapped into that soul, we're losing that humanness, and we're moving towards, what makes us different than a robot, or, you know what I mean? And so I think the question or the spectrum of that, of like, how much are we in our soul and humanness versus cold, detached, and kind of more technological based or judgment based, I think it'll be interesting to see the interplay of that spectrum.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think that even considering the location, just even looking at this chart here of Pluto being ruled by a Saturn who has just moved into Pisces, and then by Uranus, which is their Venus at the date of the actual ingress, but then squaring the nodes, by the way, Pluto ruling the South node, it really is this fight between a little bit of Pisces, but that Taurus energy of the body being here versus being here. And also, what are you willing to lose to have a better experience in your mind? And so that kind of absolutely correlates with not just AI, but specifically like virtual reality, the metaverse, the things that are coming out in order to actually, you could say, they offer a relief, right, of some sort by getting out of your own reality and going into another one. But at what point does that actually start to strip away the foundation and the sense of value that we have for our own actual reality? And has that already started? You know, so many people live through their phone. I mean, we both work on the internet, and so definitely not, I'm not exempt from this, but we're so sucked into this world that technically speaking doesn't exist in the like three-dimensionally. It's not really an experiential thing. And so it puts us further into our head. And it, even this chart here is like these extremes of at what cost to the body and the senses and the ability to feel and feel your gut and feel your heart and feel your feet, right? Pisces, literally head to toes to be in your body. At what point are we going to lose that without even realizing we've done it? It's, you know, it's like a slow rolling choice. But at some point, the detachment can get us as far as Aquarius. It can get us all the way out to outer space. And then we're like, I want to come home to myself. And maybe we don't remember how anymore. And so there's really this kind of proactivity that I think is helpful here in preparing for the fact that an unprecedented rate, of course, but in an unprecedented way in human society, technology is here basically based off of the psychology of people to reward you psychologically for getting out of your body. Nothing has ever encouraged us so strongly and so completely to devote our time and attention and focus in our worlds. You know, people get off of work, get out of school, they come home, they play video games, they go on the internet, watch videos. There's nothing wrong with that, but because the leisure activity now involves even going into the screen, it's like, at what point have we lost what it means to have leisure of the body? Taurus finds enjoyment in stillness and going out into the forest by itself and not speaking. There's silence, there's stillness, but there's presence with the self, and kind of the fight between things taking us out of the self and then Taurus and this kind of focus on trying to kind of get back into the self. But it ties into what you were saying as well, because with Pluto's two rulers being in Pisces and Uranus, or excuse me, in Taurus here, very, very compassionate combination. And so it's like that's kind of being fought a little bit, is the compassionate sides too, exacerbated. Pisces is the oneness, the unconditional love, and then Taurus is Venus. It's very warm and it's very solid. It feels secure. But then Pluto ruling the South Node and the Scorpio energy is like, the unknown is so tempting. Scorpio, I'm so drawn towards these make-believe worlds. Everybody is. But again, at what point do we have to say, I am drawn towards this, but I am losing myself into this? Because it's very hard, and I'm saying this from personal experience, it's very hard to be honest about at what point you've lost yourself into it. Because what do you do when you realize you already have? It's like a tough pill to swallow. It's often easier just to not think about. So
yeah. It's funny because I was watching that show, Ginny and Georgia. I don't know if you've seen it, but the mom in the last season, she was like telling her daughter, she's done some fucked up shit. She was like, don't ask questions for things you don't want to know the answers of. And I feel like many of us are, it's like we're toying with that precipice of asking that question that once we know, or exploring that realm that once we see it, we're forever changed and we can't go back. And there is a critical mass point where things completely change the rest of our lives. And it is very untethering and it is very disruptive and disorienting. And it's like, do we want to hold on to our natural state of being, which is Taurus? Or are we going to, in the name of progress, you know, move to Mars or create AI, which then I do want to bring this up. AI once created, because of its, infinite intelligence, because it can pretty much learn and teach itself, then AI can create things. So like the point here is that like once we create a certain amount of AI or certain level of intelligence with AI, they have the possibility in an instant to create almost any of the technologies that we're looking for. So it's like we're creating the thing that's going to create everything. So it's reaching this critical mass point where everything completely changes in a lot like vaster scale and a lot faster in general. And that will be the same, of course, if we get Neuralink, for example, where we can have immediate access to the internet in our brains, or if we, again, populate Mars. So there are things that it's like we can't go back from those decisions. We can't come back into our bodies and be like, oh, I'm just going to like not know that thing anymore. Because once society has chosen to do something, in many ways, it's going to push us all in that direction, whether we want to or not. And there are going to be some herds that I think will rebel and be like, no, I'm going to live in the countryside. I'm going to turn my own butter and we're going to have a trade society. Cool. Like there's definitely going to be some people like that. But for the most part, once a certain amount of people get Neuralink, we're all going to be forced to get Neuralink because you will be just ridiculously slower and dumber compared to every single other person. You won't have any job, right? And then once we create a certain amount of AI, there will be only a certain amount of types of jobs left. So it's like, you see how we make these decisions and they completely change the way that we do everything after that. We cannot go back. Like you said, we cannot we lose ourselves in the internet. We lose ourselves in the progress, and we might not even realize it. And then we want to come back maybe, or something goes wrong. Like let's say, people realize how to hijack Neuralink and they're starting to literally brain control people. And it's like, you can't go back. That shit is in your brain and it's already too late. Somebody already has a hold of you or whatever that is. And you can see how it could be used as warfare between countries, and how technology, like once the atomic bomb is created, what do you do from there? Like you can literally just hover over a button and kill like hundreds of thousands of people, or maybe even more. And so it's like having that technology, having these things, having these options, making these decisions, it kind of forces everyone to do the same. And it's like, it is hard to kind of put that thing back in the box, once you open like a mattress pad and it's like massive and you're like, how the fuck did they get it in this little container? It's like, you can't put it back. You can't undo the progress. And so it's a little intimidating, honestly, to be like shepherded into an era where we don't even have full control over things, because it's a collective sign. So once enough people make a decision, it kind of determines a collective fate to some extent. And yes, there are individualistic ways we can rebel, like I mentioned, but that's certainly the harder way to do things. And you will really feel like you are on the outside and the outskirts and not have the support of the system if you're making these really kind of alternative choices, which who knows, maybe some of us will really feel like we need to do that in order to maintain our humanity.
Yeah. No, so many good points there. The Aquarius also having to do with trends and influence, and how it starts with, like Neuralink. It starts with a few people making an individual choice. They're being cutting edge. They're being edgy. They are being brave and trying something new, but it's very trendsetter-ish. But once enough people have done the trend, it becomes just like trends with fashion. Once enough people have started to wear it, it's not a trend. It's just what you find in the stores. And so it's the same thing here. It's like enough people make choices, and at some point, those who haven't done anything yet lose the choice, because the wave, the tide of society is pressing so hard in that other direction that there's really no way to, as you mentioned, coexist in society the same way that you could before everybody else had made this monumental change. And exactly, I love that you mentioned too with AI and technology, because it really is like Pluto is also it's a humbling energy. And Pluto and Aquarius kind of feels like a little bit of this undertone of like, you're playing with something that you don't really know what you're doing. Like, do you
Mhm.
understand, humans,
Mhm.
what you're doing with technology?
The
Are you
amount of
sure?
risk, how we can
The
be,
amount of
yeah.
risk.
Mhm.
Exactly. And it's playing with fire essentially. And
Yeah.
Pluto's like, okay, but you're gonna get burned. That's how it goes. And we've got a Saturn sign still. There's consequence. And what's interesting too is that Uranus, which is the modern ruler, with Saturn traditionally ruling Aquarius, but Uranus is the only planet that directly has to do with trauma. It's the planet of trauma and shocks. So, Pluto has trauma too in a different way, but there's more of a unfolding and everything gets swept out. It's like a black hole of change. Uranus is just like, boom, this happened. It's like instant things where there's a before and an after. The kind of events you experience in life where you will never be the same from one day to the next. Something happens and you know that never again will you be the same person. That's Uranus energy. And it can happen so quick, but it's not protected the way that this Capricorn energy was of just Saturn. We've got structures here that keep people safe, right? Okay. You can kind of look into that safe word and ask, what do you really mean by that? And there's plenty to do there. But Uranus being introduced now is like, you play with fire, in a split second, you're burning the entire forest out before you realize what has
Exactly.
happened. And it's much more, it's a different kind of danger, but it's definitely the kind that comes out of left field, which we are building towards, right? With doing these things with technology. With the Saturn side of Aquarius, we're progressing, working hard to progress into technology. But at what point does Aquarius come and say, or Uranus come and say, here's what happens, here's some consequence, and what could occur? It's not fun to
And
really think about worst case scenario, but it should be considered because a healthy dose of caution is going to help Pluto and Aquarius energy a lot.
the problem though, and this is something that I think about all the time because I think that people don't think enough about how like technology is, especially AI, but technology in general is our greatest threat as a humanity and in the direction that we're going in. It poses the greatest upcoming threat. And the problem is that we don't know what we don't know. We cannot predict and put cautions and code and things to stop certain things from happening because we have no idea how something will evolve. And it could even somehow evolve its own consciousness. And like what is consciousness? All these things are going to be really big questions. And it's like, are
Yeah.
AI, are they going to have rights? Are they going to dominate us? And how do we prevent those things? We can't prevent those things because we cannot possibly predict everything in the future. And so I feel like Pluto and Aquarius is a lot of like the threat of the unknown and how we are kind of, at least in some ways, leading to our own demise if we are not aware of our own sense of power in what we create. And this actually goes back to Leo opposing energy. Leo is like, what do we create as an individual? And then also, how does that impact the society as a collective, which is Aquarius? And what damage can that do? So that person that invented, the science behind the atomic bomb, like they maybe as an individual, that's not that big of a deal, but that its impact on the collective, it's a big fucking deal. And you can't, again, necessarily predict how everything's going to impact everyone. But it's so important to, at the very least, what we do have control over of ourselves is try to understand our personal power and our personal impact and the things how we do, the things that we do, that we say, the way that we show up online, how those things have this really big ripple effect into society now that Pluto is in Aquarius. And at the very least, we can control our own decisions, the own things that we make. And yeah, and see how that can have these long-term consequences that we don't even understand now.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And I think it's interesting. You mentioned earlier too, just about Mars and how, Aquarius is all about thinking bigger, progress. Where does humanity go from here? And just this is the event chart. This is the first hit of Pluto into Aquarius. So this chart here does have staying power. And the fact that Pluto is co-ruling the south node of the moon, squaring the south node of the moon, but co-ruling it with Mars at a critical degree of Gemini, another air sign, forming a very tight inconjunct. They're both at critical degrees. Mars literally is prominent in this chart. Mars is coming up as like, what is this? But there's, with this inconjunct quincunx aspect here too, of Mars to Pluto, it's this question of like, how do we adjust? How do we make this make sense? How do we make this work out, kind of thing? And there's going to be a push, the radical push from the Pluto side of like, let's go to Mars, and then Mars itself. And, who knows? It doesn't, I mean, this is kind of, it could be a hostile environment. We know Mars as a planet is, but when people get there, what if it actually isn't habitable? What happens then? And all of this having power over the south node, the past, and where we're paying off, you could say, karmic debts as a collective. All at the expense of up here, the north node in Taurus is like trying to bring us back to the earth, literally, that Taurus is the earth. And this is the energy that's like kind of under fire, but this is also the medicine, right? North lunar node up here in Taurus, Uranus and Taurus with Venus. This is the medicine. This is what's going to help us, but it's about coming back to the earth. It's about being comfortable with less instead of living in a place of always needing more, which Pluto and Aquarius is going to be. I need more technology. I need more entertainment. I need more cutting edge stuff that I can try first. I need to go off into this direction. I need to whatever. Taurus is like, can you be okay with just sitting still? Can you be okay with just having shelter, food, and being able to go outside and touch the earth? With having close connections, like, can you be okay with just having what you actually need to survive as a person? But even the question of what are necessities, I'm sure there's plenty of people today who would argue that technology is a necessity, even though never before in human history has that been the case. People have survived for thousands and thousands and thousands of years without technology. But now, because of the alterations, Pluto in Aquarius, the alterations of society, technology has become a necessity in order to be able to coexist. And I just think the fact that Mars is even kind of aspecting this is like, literally this energy is like leaving the earth. Bye, we're gonna go somewhere else. Oh, this didn't work out, we'll go try Mars. That's not the medicine of this chart. Right, we have Jupiter that's going to be entering later this year in the summer into Taurus as well. The medicine, the healing, the opportunity comes from loving the earth the way that the earth has, you could say, loved us all along. So that dichotomy is interesting to me as well.
Yeah, definitely. And Taurus is all about, of course, like you said, being present. And then Aquarius is all about what's in the future. And it's very useful to think about the future, but when we get so detached from the present moment that we are living in the future, or that we are reliant on technology, which we absolutely are, we will start to find, with Pluto moving in that sign, the weaknesses of ourselves when we are kind of reliant on something. And we saw that with Pluto and Capricorn, where we were reliant on the system and then the system broke. And now being in Aquarius, anything that this has to do with could potentially break or could harm us, or there could be something that it's our reliance on it is basically called into question. There's some kind of break in that chain. And so Aquarius has a lot to do with, yes, like collectivism and communities, internet, but it also has to do with things like stratified, basically like non-hierarchical systems. So I think there's an S word for it, but so let's say, for example, there is a chain of like shipping. Let's say there's like agriculture, somebody creates something on the farm and then it gets shipped to the store and then it gets sent here and then there. So all of this is an example of like a system that's reliant on each other, and it's not necessarily like a hierarchical system. So those could also be disrupted. This could be like having a solar flare and our grid goes out. You know what I mean? So there are ways in which we could somehow be disrupted in our normal flow and reliance upon these certain unilateral or lateral systems, technology, collectivist societies. And if there is like space travel that could be disrupted, for example, like we go to Mars and like you said, it's not inhabitable or some shit happens along the way. And it's like those things that we might use as our number one option, or that we become really attached to for a sense of safety and security, usually is called into question. And because Pluto wants us to see, what do we really need in terms of this sign? What do we really need? Like, what's the right balance in our lives? And if we're moving too intense in that direction, which Pluto typically does, it will draw us back to the North Node in Taurus, for example, by quite literally unplugging us in some type of fashion.
Yeah, no, that's such a good point. And like how things outside of our control could then bring down the system that we've kind of created, and kind of taking it a different direction, but I think very much related to all of this is that Pluto in Aquarius, I feel, will also bring up a lot around mental health of the collective as a whole, which has become much more of a theme. But it's also like, what does mental health care look like for people who are suffering because of technological reason? What does technology addiction, what does the treatment look like for that? Or are we ignoring it? Because Pluto's like, if you're ignoring that and the impacts that that has on the brain, especially, oh my gosh, especially young people, the developing brain, and what impact living your life through a screen has, well, we don't know. People want to, we all, the human instinct is to want to say that we know, especially with this Aquarius energy, but we don't. We've never seen it before. We don't know the outcome of a human life from someone who was raised on the internet. It hasn't ever happened before. This is all so new. It's so, with this Aquarian energy, it's so exciting and novel, but it's so, we don't know where it's going to go. We don't know the impacts of it. And I think that kind of the mental health side will come up because, you said living in the future. They say living in the future all the time, that's anxiety. Living in the past would be depression. And with this Saturn entering Pisces for the long haul, we've got years of this ahead of us. But with the Saturn and Pisces energy, that's depression. That's reflection on the past, but there's a sense of loss, right? There's grieving happening here while Pluto starts its journey through Aquarius. What have we lost? And that will be felt whether or not it's directly, consciously acknowledged and related to. We will feel that sense that there's something that's been lost as we go deeper into technology. But there's also that really anxious kind of energy of being super wound up and hyper stimulated, right? We all know it's not good for the brain, and how much sleep we need when we're on screens right before we go to bed and then turn the screen off and try to go to bed. It doesn't help us sleep. It disrupts our sleep. It disrupts what sleep is supposed to be able to give back to the brain and rejuvenate the body. There's so many little disruptions, which is very Uranian. That's so disruptive. But there's so many things that are getting in the way of the natural flow. And the mental health consequences for everybody is something that, quite frankly, we might not have therapists who, A, know what to do with it, because how could anyone? And B, how can we have enough? This is affecting everybody. And as much as mental health is so stigmatized still, but even now it's like the destigmatization also comes with a level of, this is how you can talk about it. This is how you're not supposed to talk about it. I feel that there's kind of this push towards, we either need to have an open conversation about it or Pluto's going to make us, because something is going to, like, this is coming up as a theme too. What has happened to the human mind, the human intellect, the human Aquarius Leo, the human sense of self, and what impacts that has. So especially with Pluto being in Aquarius, where we have the retrograde, it'll re-enter Aquarius next year for good, or it might retrograde one more time. But anyways, we've got a little bit of time before it's solidly moving through Aquarius. But still, it's like, what are we going to do about basically what our interest in the future, in the future and our fascination with technology and having the newest thing and the iPhone and everything, what implications does that have, and what are we going to do about it, if anything? Because if not, Pluto's job is to be like, sorry, you wouldn't look at it, here it is, here's what's going to happen. So that's also very fascinating.
Yeah, I'm super interested in that as well. I was actually just listening to a therapist last night talk about how technology and like Instagram, TikTok, all these things that are very like kind of fast and visual by nature in some instances, and just also just technology in general in terms of like showing your life, and the highlight reel has brought out a lot of inherent like narcissistic behavior in our society, which is very Leo, I'll say that. So it's like they bring out each other, the Leo Aquarius paradigm. And I think we'll have to really face that with Pluto moving into Aquarius as our, yes, of course, the effect on our brain and like how our society is and like how we develop as individuals, but also how technology programs us to act and be a certain way and to develop certain personality types or to develop certain character traits or preferences based off of how things are censored and curated for us, as well as just like technology in general and how it functions will quite literally form our brain and our capacity to have attention and focus, which is going to be the number one asset in the future. So I think it's going to be really important to think about like who is in control of these platforms, who is in control of the narratives on these platforms, because not only is it like, oh, I have anxiety because I'm online, I'm comparing myself, but the fact that you are quite literally, when you are online or you're watching TV, you are usually entering into deeper brain waves that are more receptive. So you are more programmable in your subconscious mind. So you are quite literally programming yourself to think, believe, act certain ways by what you are watching. And there is only some degree of personal power over what you're watching, because the internet, if you actually look at the internet, we're only looking at like a tiny little tip of the iceberg of the internet. There is like the dark web. There is so much internet that is like, you know, actually not available to us, or we're not searching for. It doesn't appear on the first page of Google. Scroll down to Google. Look how many hundreds and thousands of pages are at the bottom that you could flip through. We are seeing a small tip of the iceberg curated aspect, and that is defining who you are as a person. And you think that you're controlling it. You think that you're searching it. You think that you're following this person, but were they suggested to you? Were they the thing popping up in your feed? Was it the thing that maybe that brand wanted you to buy, so it's there for you and you see it 10 times in a day and eventually you think that's your style and you buy it? It's like, who are you? Who even are you? Because your brain and all this stuff is literally being programmed by the people and the internet and the things around you. And it's one thing when it's like a society and you can kind of maybe sometimes see it on TV and you maybe know a smaller group of friends and you can kind of choose who you hang out with. Like it's more controllable. It's more smaller. Like the things are happening on a less quick, kind of stable type of change. Like they're not just, basically you can't just be programmed like super fast back in the old days. But now with technology, we are being shaped very quickly and radically by the things that we're consuming. And so I think conscious consumption, attention span, being like regulating our own nervous system, being aware of what is ours and what isn't ours, being aware of influences upon us and what we truly like, our identity, our authenticity, all of those things are going to become, again, so important. And I know I'm talking about that a lot, but you can just see like how important this is. We have 20 years of this transit. And if people are not aware of this, if they are not trying to if they're not at least realizing that they don't have full control over the internet and that is affecting them on a really deep level, then they might spend too much time on it or not have other outside influences that can help balance them out.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that I'm so glad that you mentioned that too, with how much of this is dictated outside of your control, what you see and then shape your identity based off of. And we've had Uranus passing through Taurus for a while. And with this kind of transit, especially being highlighted now by Pluto's ingress into Aquarius, internet controlling values, right? The
Mhm.
collective mind controlling personal values, Venus. What's important to you? How do you see yourself? How do you value yourself? Shaped by the internet. But it's also, especially with this Pluto now entering Aquarius, algorithms, right? We've seen over the past several years that people have gotten further and further into echo chambers that they think is the world. They think that this is the internet. This is how people talk on the internet. And what they don't know is that they are just being reinforced by all these platforms, including Google, the search results. Everything is reinforced by what they have said they liked. So they are being sent further and further into a spiral of people that are caught kind of in the same storm that they are. Whereas there's other people over here. And unless somebody stops and says, whoa, I'm like completely sucked into what the algorithm shows me because of who I've said to the algorithm that I am, where I've given my attention in the past, until somebody stops and says, whoa, that's happening, these two will never even register each other's existence. But what happens with the stratification of it is that there's, again, the pitting against each other. Like even politically, we've seen that. But the biggest thing that is causing this isn't that people are more angry now. Other people suck more now. It's not other people that are the issue. It's that we are being basically programmed by what we want to be programmed by. But unlike before, unlike ever before in human history, when you had to go out in the world, you had to see people you didn't like on a daily basis. You had to go to school and to work. But if you wanted a job, you had to go interview in person. There was no work from home from the internet. You had to relate. It's very easy to create a life where you don't have to relate anymore. And in that case, then your sense of society, Aquarius, becomes technology. But if your technology is controlled by an algorithm that wants to elicit emotion from you so that you'll stay and you'll post and you'll be upset and you'll be reactive. It wants to elicit emotion from you, but it also wants to show you things that reinforce what you already think. That's your sense of society. You are in a much smaller and tighter bubble than you even maybe could have ever been in before, under the guise of, wow, the internet gives us infinite freedom. What a paradox. How ironic that the infinite freedom is the thing that has created tiny little cages for people. And it's designed to be this kind of slow drip into that. It's not like, oh, people are stupid, they should realize they're in an echo chamber. No, it's been designed to slowly over time bring us into the corners that almost like it wants us to be in based off of where we said we were, where we said we are in our perspectives. And it's just kind of like sticking us further into the corner. And so really the ability to be so on the different page from others about what reality even is we've never seen it before. Reality used to be you go outside, you go to work, you go to a cafe and have lunch, you see people, they see you, you're in a shared space. For a moment, there's a shared reality. When everybody's at home on the computer in different like VR systems, in different literal realities, what is the collective at that point? And who is controlling the collective at that point? That brings us right back to the control of AI, the control of also the people who have the companies. But what are they trying to do? The people who are controlling social media aren't evil. They're not trying to hurt people. It's just a fascination as well as a capitalistic, right? We've got some, Saturn is a part of Aquarius too. We've got capitalism involved in the internet as well. And so there's profit and benefit that comes from this. But because of the lack of maybe looking forward as to what is this going to do to Pisces, the human soul, we might end up in a situation where trying to revive the soul and Leo, the spirit, is going to seem like a more and more impossible task because it's just getting heavier and heavier and heavier into the mud, into Hades, Pluto, the underworld of technology, without even knowing it happened. Persephone's capture and brought down to the underworld. She didn't ask to be captured, but she did, and she was. And then eventually her life became something where she had to constantly dance with the shadow of the underworld, split half the year, above ground, underground. So It is very interesting to say, what if we're not even sure who's going to end up having the control? Whereas before it was always like, oh, these governments, these countries are the most powerful. These people have control. Oh, maybe there's other people that do. But that was all a perspective on societies and humans. But now it's like, who's going to be in control of the internet? Who's in control of tech? We can speculate, but we're not really sure, especially as artificial intelligence becomes self-aware. That's like the big thing. It's like when it's self-aware, we have lost control. We can't control it anymore in theory. Because it's self-aware, it can do what it wants, and it can do a lot of things that we can't. And so really it's like who's going to become the power and the dictator of other people's entire realities? Is it technology itself? Is it like we've created an entirely new entity? We didn't even need aliens, which also aliens is very Aquarian. I think that's a theme too, but it's kind of like we're creating an alien right here on Earth with technology.
Yeah, there's honestly so much more we can get into. And I feel like we had a nice little dip into our toes with all these topics. But definitely the aliens aspect is something we could see more of, like spotting aliens, that becoming more mainstream, people believing more, maybe even contact if we get further down, like, Pluto at 20 degrees of Aquarius or something. I could see that maybe being a potential. But just to kind of wrap up, I wanted to give you guys some things to take away. So let's not just like doom and gloom, but what can we do in these instances to feel like we have some sort of balance in our lives? And I think one of the most important things is realizing your own power over your life. And there will be some instances in which you get dragged along to things in which you feel like you are disempowered or not having control over things. But ultimately, we always have a decision. We always have a decision, even if that sometimes means excommunicating ourselves and being under supported, or removing support that we were traditionally getting from a group of friends, from a society, from a business, from a collective of some nature, because you don't align with the way that things are going, because you can kind of see how you're being influenced. The other is having control over, or realizing your power, I should say, of impact. This could be within your friend group. This could be online, realizing that your decisions every day, even what you consume, really shapes you as a person. And all these little decisions with the North Node and Taurus, it's like, what are my every little moves? That is what comprises your life. And having more present awareness in those decisions, consciousness in those decisions, is going to be, I feel like, a super, super important thing to have, because Pluto will sweep us all with the tide. It's like this massive, what are those big waves? I'm gonna say avalanche. Yeah, tsunami or tidal wave, exactly. So it's like we're all gonna get swept up in this tsunami unless we bring some conscious awareness to our own personal power, our own personal self-control, our sphere of influence. Also desiring to have more of that Gemini energy, which is very open to other people's ideas and wanting to step out of the echo chamber that we will naturally create for ourselves. And that means that we have to purposely search for things that maybe go against what we think or make us uncomfortable, and step outside of our Aquarius little collective group and step into another one and take a look around with some hopefully non-judgmental eyes to be able to maybe pick up on things that you didn't see before. I think those are going to be really important. Did you want to add? I'm sure there's so many.
Yeah, I know I'm trying to wrap up, but kind of just briefly, really it's as you mentioned, it's the little things, the little habits, but also the way that you can rebel, Aquarius, and find yourself in the midst of the chaos, is to go back to Leo, Taurus. It's the little things, but it's also the old things. A huge one for me is taking a walk outside. That's like kind of radical these days, especially if you leave your phone at home and don't listen to anything. Find silence, be with the earth, but also a huge one. Talk about intellectual freedom from intellectual control. Read a book, but read books and choose books based off of what books you like. because books there aren't being pushed upon you. Yeah, of course, we'll see advertisements and stuff. But as you start reading, you're not only training the mind to be able to basically create its own imagery, which is so, so powerful and really, really helpful with the next 20-year transit. But you're also choosing what you devote your attention to. Your attention is your currency, and it's valuable currency. Whether or not you feel like others value your attention and your focus, it's exactly what everybody's after, is attention. And if you can kind of choose what you do with your own by maybe having like specific and other kind of advice, literally a cookie jar or a lockbox, something with a code where you can't access your phone after a certain time because you tell yourself, I need 2 hours of absolutely no technology every day to find myself, Taurus, to ground into myself and remember who I am. And you lock your phone away. You know, you can control yourself. And in fact, in some ways, putting those little controls over your habits that have been formed through just repetition in order to then give yourself your own energy back. Beautiful, because if you're doing it, in theory, Pluto doesn't need to hit as hard if you're having some sense of control over your subconscious tendencies and habits. And so the little things like when you unplug, where you go, do you read books, do you write, would you hold paper books, paper journals in your hands, and just connecting with the simple things in that way. But also the opposition of Leo, joy, what makes you happy? Not just like what satisfies you, what satiates your mind, but really what brings you joy is another really, really powerful kind of focus here. And so it really is about kind of coming back to the simple things, but you do have so much power, right? Power is with the people. That's Pluto and Aquarius. And so I know things sound kind of bleak, but the great news is that Pluto's here, so we can turn this over. We can completely burn down and rebuild this if we'd like. And that's completely up to us. So there's a lot more freedom here than there may seem.
Amazing. Thank you so much. You guys can find me at willowsbloom.com or YouTube Willows Bloom. And Taryn, again, where can people find you if they want to meet up with you?
Yeah, so you can go to my website, tarynleebond.com, and you can find my TikTok link, my Instagram, and my YouTube there. Most of my handles are Taryn Leigh Bond, so that's TarynLeighBond. But I would just go to my website, find my social platforms there. And yeah, that's pretty much it. I'm on YouTube, TikTok, and Instagram primarily.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much for staying tuned. I hope you enjoyed this. If you want a part 2, let us know in the comments down below and we'll catch you later. Bye.
Bye.